This week I'm working on a Union number 4 hand plane. This was given to me by one of my buddies at the wood turning club. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. Lots of rust, and I'm going to go through the breakdown process now. Actually, I've already cleaned the blade and the chip guard, and this is a bit of a recreation. So this is taking off the front knob, and actually all the screws came out of this pretty easily. One big problem with this plane is the handle was broken. You'll see a little bit more detail about that later. But all the screws did come out without too much trouble. Right there, I'm just trying to break the joint. And that was glued, and a piece of dowel was stuck in there to support it. A lot of these old planes that I've seen have that broken crack in the exact same spot. I guess there's too much torque on that handle. It's also called the Tote. This part here is the frog. So actually, a plane is pretty simple. There's probably only a dozen or so parts. There's about 4 or 5 different screws. I did all the brass pieces right away just because they're nice and easy. I did these on a steel wire wheel. I would recommend when you're doing this to wear gloves, because that piece could get into your hand very quickly. A piece of the steel, I mean. So I actually used several different methods to clean up the plane iron. You're supposed to flatten the back of these, and I tried a couple different methods, and there's lots of different ways to do this, but I'm using on this one my Grizzly wet sharpener. I also did the primary bevel with this tool. So this actually takes a couple minutes to do this, even on a wet grinder like this. So once you do the primary bevel, you also have to do a secondary bevel. Here I'm getting into the front knob, and what I did is I just chucked this up on one of my pen mandrels, and that made fast work of this. There's really no problem with the front knob at all. But I did have to repair the Tote. Speaking of the Tote, so I had to drill out the old piece of dowel that was in there, and I wanted to put another one back in just to support this handle. So I used some 5-minute epoxy, applied it liberally, and then I'm going to clamp this up. The roofing nails are what I used to close up the 5-minute epoxy bottles. I did let this dry overnight. 5-minute epoxy hardens in 5 minutes, but I think it's best to really let it cure for 24 hours before working it. So here what I did is I made that hole a 1/4 inch, and I didn't have a 1/4 inch dowel. So I went over to the lathe and made myself a little 1/4 inch dowel here. Then I trimmed that off a little bit later on my bandsaw. So once I sanded this with different methods, including my oscillating spindle sander, a drum sander, balloon type thing on my lathe, and hand sanding, I'm putting on a coat of gel stain. After I put this on, I put on several coats of lacquer. So now that all the easy parts were done, I had to flatten out the bottom, and this part stinks. This is no fun whatsoever. So this actually took, I would say, at least an hour on different size grits to try to flatten out the sole of the plane. It takes a lot of effort. Here I'm just putting on some magic marker lines to see how flat or unflat it is. This took quite a bit of time. Everything repairing the plane was a lot of fun except that part. I wasn't really crazy about the finish I was getting on the Grizzly wet sander, so I did try to get it even a little bit sharper using some of my whetstones. So it easily goes through paper. I had a little trouble getting it to shave the hair off my arm, but I eventually got it that way. Took a lot of effort though. I gotta admit, fixing an old tool like this, there's a bit of zen to it. It was very relaxing. To clean off most of the parts of the plane, I did hit it on my wire wheels. I had a combination of steel wheels and brass wheels. And here I'm just putting a coat of black paint on there. I didn't show you the masking process. Overall, this project took about 4 or 5 hours, and I'm condensing it down to less than 10 minutes. So here, I'm just going through the final assembly stages again. I had a fan off to my left there, as it was very hot today in the shop. So everything went together nice and easily. On the lever cap, I did also clean up that part on a buffing wheel, and it came up very shiny. Almost looks like chrome. I was very impressed. And I used a little emery buffing compound and just a cheap and dirty buffing wheel that I had gotten over at Home Depot. So if you've never done a project like this before, I would highly recommend it. It does take some time. I've heard a couple guys on YouTube saying that you can do this in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I don't think that's true whatsoever. It takes a lot of effort to clean the paint off, especially if you're using a chemical like vinegar or vapor rust. That takes overnight. On this one, I did not use any chemicals to remove the rust or the paint, but it's kind of a dirty process also, especially if you're doing the sanding and the grinding of the plane and the paint. But I think it's well worth it also. Remember what it looked like before. It didn't look anywhere like this at all. There was rust all over the thing. And I gotta say, it was quite a bit of fun to do it. So you see some pitting up there on the top right hand side. That would have taken a lot longer to sand that out. I really don't want to put another couple hours into that. That was tough enough getting it as flat as I could there. but yeah, it's certainly much shinier than it used to be, and overall I'm happy with it. So here comes the main test, and full transparency. It took me about 10 minutes to get up to this stage. I was trying different types of woods and different depths of the cutter blade, but eventually I did start getting some decent shavings on it. I think I might have to do even a little bit more sharpening on this thing, but for now, this is pretty nice. So coming up are a few stills of, there's the before shot. This is the now shot. Again, the old plane versus my new shiny plane. It's going to be a nice addition to my collection. So hey, thanks for watching, and you know the drill. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode of Bob's Woodshop. Thanks for tuning in today.